When James Ashcroft inherits his father's plantation, he makes the radical decision to free all enslaved women, except Leah. His complicated feelings for her create tension as he navigates between old Southern traditions and his progressive ideals. As enemies plot against them, James and Leah must find their path to love built on true freedom, not ownership. A tale of courage, transformation, and choosing a better future together. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The grandfather clock in the hallway of Ashcroft Plantation chimed 3 times as James Ashcroft stood in his father's study. The room still smelled like his father's cigar smoke, even though the old man had been dead for 2 weeks. James ran his fingers over the polished mahogany desk where his father had signed countless deals, ordered countless punishments, and ruled with an iron fist for 30 years. At 26, James never thought he'd be back here. Not like this. Not as the master of Ashcroft Plantation. He'd escaped to Boston 5 years ago to study law, vowing never to return to the family business he despised. But his father's heart attack changed everything. "Mr. James?" A voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Wilson, his father's old butler. "The lawyer is here with the papers you requested." James nodded. "Send him in." Mr. Peterson, a small man with round spectacles, entered carrying a leather portfolio. His eyes darted nervously around the room. "Are you certain about this, Mr. Ashcroft?" Peterson asked, placing several documents on the desk. "Your father would—" "My father is dead," James said firmly. "And I'm not him." Peterson sighed. "The town is already talking. This will cause an uproar. Let them talk." James picked up the first document and read the title, Declaration of Emancipation. His heart raced as he dipped the pen in ink and signed his name with a flourish. One by one, he signed the papers that would free every enslaved woman on the plantation. Outside, the sun beat down on the cotton fields where dozens of women worked under the watchful eye of the overseer. They had no idea their lives were about to change forever. Later that afternoon, James called everyone to gather in front of the main house. Women with weathered hands and wary eyes stood in hushed groups. Some carried babies, others stood alone, their faces unreadable masks after years of hiding their true feelings. James climbed the steps of the porch and faced them. "As of today," he announced, his voice carrying across the crowd, "every woman on this plantation is free." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Some women began to cry. Others looked suspicious, as if expecting some cruel joke. "Each of you will receive e-papers with your legal name," James continued. "You'll be paid fair wages if you choose to stay and work here, or you may leave and seek opportunity elsewhere. The choice is yours." Mr. Wilson began calling names and handing out papers. Women stepped forward one by one, trembling hands accepting the documents that declared them free. In the back of the crowd, Leah stood very still. She'd been the housekeeper, the one his father kept closest. At 24, she'd spent her entire life on the plantation. Her mother had died in the same house where Leah now cleaned and cooked and kept silent. Leah waited for her name to be called. She watched as others received their freedom, their faces transforming with disbelief and joy. But Wilson reached the end of the stack, and her name never came. The crowd dispersed slowly, women hugging each other, some dancing, others weeping. Leah remained rooted to the spot, her hands clenched at her sides. James noticed her standing there alone. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away. "That will be all, Wilson," James said. "Thank you." As twilight settled over the plantation, James sat on the veranda with a glass of bourbon. The house felt different already. Several women had immediately packed their few belongings and left. Others had moved from the cramped cabins to vacant rooms in the east wing that James had opened up. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Leah stood at the edge of the porch, her slim figure silhouetted against the dusky light. "Why not me?" she asked, her voice low but clear. James set down his glass. In all the years he'd known her, even before he left for Boston, he'd hardly ever heard her speak. She sang sometimes, hymns in the garden when she thought no one was listening, but she never spoke directly to any Ashcroft. "Pardon," he said, although he'd hear her perfectly. "All the others," Leah said, taking a step closer. "You freed them all, but not me." For the first time, she was looking him straight in the eye. Her gaze was unwavering, challenging. James stood up. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," Leah replied. "Either I'm free or I'm not, and according to those papers, I'm still your property." The word property hit him like a slap. Is that what she thought? "That's not it," James said. "I don't see you as property." "Then what am I?" Leah asked. "If not free, then what?" James took a deep breath. "Because I don't want to free you like the others. I want you to choose me as a wife, not because you have to, but because you'd stay even when the door is open." Leah's eyes widened. Then she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed across the veranda. "You won't even give me the chance to walk through that door. How is that choice?" James looked away, unable to bear the accusation in her eyes. "Because I'm afraid you'll leave," he admitted quietly. The admission hung in the air between them. For a moment, neither spoke. "I've watched you," James finally said, "for years, before I left for Boston. The way you carry yourself, your kindness to others, even when my father was cruel, your strength. I've never met another woman like you." "You don't know me," Leah said. "You've seen what I've allowed you to see, nothing more." "Then let me know you," James pleaded, "not as master and servant, as equals." "Equals?" Leah's voice rose slightly. "How can we be equals when you hold my freedom in your hands?" She turned to go, but James called after her. "Leah, please, I'm not my father." She paused but didn't turn around. "No, your father never pretended to be anything other than what he was." With that, she disappeared into the growing darkness, leaving James Aloney with his thoughts. The next morning, James found Leah in the kitchen preparing breakfast as usual. She moved efficiently around the room, her face a careful blank. "You don't have to do this anymore," James said from the doorway. "What should I do instead?" Leah asked without looking at him. "Since I can't leave." James winced at her words. "You can do whatever you want within the plantation. I won't assign you any tasks." "And if I choose to do nothing, then do nothing," James said. "But you'll still receive wages, like everyone else." Leah finally turned to face him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I want to prove to you that I mean what I say," James replied. "I want you to see that I respect you." "Respect?" Leah shook her head. "Respect would be giving me the same freedom you gave the others." James had no answer for that. He left her alone in the kitchen, the weight of her words following him throughout the day. Over the next few weeks, James tried to show Leah that he was sincere. He left books in her quarters, poetry, novels, even legal texts from his time at university. He made sure she received weekly wages, even though she continued to work around the house out of habit, or perhaps just to keep busy. He watched as other women made their choices. Some left immediately. Others stayed but moved into better quarters and took on different roles around the plantation. A few even ventured into town to look for other work, returning with news of the outside world. And through it all, Leah remained, distant, watchful. She no longer avoided James's gaze, but her eyes were guarded whenever they spoke. One evening, James found a book returned to his study, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Inside was a small note in careful handwriting, "Thank you for the book." It wasn't much, but it was the first vole. Untarry communication from Leah. James felt a surge of hope. The next day he approached her as she hung laundry in the side yard. "Did you enjoy the story?" he asked. Leah nodded. "It was different than I expected." "How so?" "I thought it would be a love story," she said, "but it's really about destruction, about how people ruin each other." Her words felt pointed, and James shifted uncomfortably. "I have others," he offered. "Happier stories if you prefer." "Is that what you think I need?" Leah asked. "Happy stories to make me forget reality?" "No," James said. "I just thought—" "You thought you could court me with books and coins," Leah interrupted, "that I'd eventually be grateful enough to accept your proposal." James felt his face flush. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Leah pinned a sheet to the line with more force than necessary. "What's not fair is holding someone captive and calling it love." "I'm not holding you captive," James protested. "Then free me," Leah challenged. James said nothing. "That's what I thought," Leah said quietly. As autumn approached, the plantation settled into new routines. Nearly half the women had left for opportunities elsewhere. Those who remained worked shorter hours for fair pay. There was less cotton planted, but James had begun diversifying the crops based on new agricultural techniques he'd learned about up north. Teehee Town's reaction had been predictably harsh. Other plantation owners refused to speak to James. He was no longer welcome at the gentlemen's club. Whispers followed him whenever he ventured into town for supplies. Radical. Troublemaker. Northerner. The worst came from Judge Thornton, whose plantation bordered Ashcroft's. "You're undermining the entire system," he had said during a chance encounter outside the general store. "Your father would be Ash Ahmed." "My father's shame is not my concern," James had replied before walking away. Back at Ashcroft, James was creating a new world, but the one person he most wanted to share it with remained just beyond his reach. One Sunday, he noticed Leah wasn't at the small chapel where many of the remaining workers gathered for worship. He searched the grounds and finally found her behind the building, sitting alone on a stone bench, tears streaming silently down her face. "Leah," he approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" She quickly wiped her cheeks. "I'm fine." James sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. "You don't seem fine." Leah looked toward the small cemetery where generations of enslaved people had been buried, including her own mother. "My mother died on this land," she said after a long silence. "Your father owned her name, and now you want me to wear yours." The raw pain in her voice cut through James's heart. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said softly. "Truly. She used to tell me stories," Leah continued as if she hadn't heard him, "about a place called Africa, about freedom. She died never knowing what it felt like to make her own choices." James nodded slowly. "I want you to reclaim it, to make it mean something else, something ours." Leah looked up. Her eyes were full of fire. "Then give me my freedom first. If I stay, it won't be in chains you can't see." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, James realized the truth. His love, if that's what it was, had become another form of bondage. In trying to keep her, he was no better than his father. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been selfish." That night, James couldn't sleep. He paced his study until dawn, wrestling with the decision he knew he had to make. As the first light broke over the horizon, he sat at his desk and pulled out a sheet of parchment. With a steady hand, he wrote out the Declaration of Emancipation for Leah. No conditions, no expectations, just freedom, pure and simple. At the bottom, after his signature, he added a personal note. "Now that you're free, will you come back to me?" As the sun rose higher, James walked to Leah's quarters and slipped the document under her door. Then he headed to the orchard, where the apple trees were heavy with fruit. He would wait there, giving her space to make her choice. In her room, Leah heard the paper slide under her door. She rose from her bed and picked up the document, her heart racing as she realized what it was. Her freedom papers, signed and sealed. Her fingers trembled as she read the note at the bottom. Emotions she couldn't name rushed through her. Relief, anger, confusion, and something else she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She stood at the window, staring out at the path that led to the orchard. Somewhere down there, James waited, alone. The choice was finally hers to make. Leah stood at the window, the freedom papers clutched in her hands. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, illuminating the words that changed everything. She was free. After 24 years of belonging to someone else, she could finally make her own choices. Her first instinct was to pack her few belongings and leave immediately, to walk through the front gates of Ashcroft Plantation and never look back. Many others had done exactly that. But something held her back. The note at the bottom of the paper, in James's neat handwriting, "Now that you're free, will you come back to me?" Leah placed the document on her small table and sat on the edge of her bed. Freedom was supposed to feel different, lighter. Instead, she felt the weight of a decision she never thought she'd have to make. Down in the orchard, James sat on a wooden bench beneath an apple tree. He'd been there for over an hour, watching the workers pick the ripe fruit. Some of them nodded to him as they passed. They were different now. Straighter backs, direct gazes. No longer afraid. James wondered if Leah had read the papers yet, if she was already packing to leave. His stomach knotted at the thought. "Mr. Ashcroft?" It was Wilson, the butler. "You have visitors," Sir James frowned. "Who is it?" "Judge Thornton and Mr. Beaumont from the bank." James sighed. This couldn't be good news. "Show them to the study. I'll be right there." In the main house, Judge Thornton and Mr. Beaumont waited impatiently. Both men were pillars of local society and major slaveholders themselves. "Ashcroft," Judge Thornton said coldly as James entered, "we need to talk about what you're doing here." "What I do on my property is my business," James replied, not offering them seats. "Not when it affects all of us," Beaumont said. "Word has spread about your experiment. We've had 3 runaways this week alone. That sounds like your problem, not mine." Judge Thornton's face reddened. "You're disturbing the natural order. These people aren't equipped for freedom. They need guidance, structure. They need basic human dignity," James countered, "something they've been denied too long." "Your father understood how things work here," Beaumont said. "He built this plantation into one of the most profitable in the county, on the backs of people who never saw a penny of that profit," James said. Judge Thornton stepped closer, his voice lowering. "We've been patient because of respect for your father. But this ends now. The bank is calling in your father's outstanding loans." James felt a chill. "What loans?" Beaumont pulled out several documents. "Your father borrowed heavily last year to expand the West Fields. The terms were generous because of who he was. But given the changes in management, the bank feels its investment is at risk." "You can't do that," James said. "We can, and we have," Judge Thornton smiled without warmth. "You have 30 days to pay in full, or the bank will begin proceedings to take the land." After they left, James sank into his father's chair. He hadn't known about the loans. His father had always been secretive about the plantation's finances. Now he understood why. The mighty Ashcroft Empire was built on debt as well as slave labor. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. James looked up to see Leah standing in the doorway, the freedom papers in her hand. "I saw them leaving," she said. Judge Thornton looked pleased with himself. James gestured to the chair across from him. "They're calling in my father's loans. I have 30 days to pay or lose everything." Leah sat down, smoothing her simple dress. "How much?" "More than I have," James admitted. "Much more." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation hanging between them. "I came to thank you," Leah finally said, holding up the papers. "For this." James managed a small smile. "You don't need to thank me for something that should have been yours all along." "No," Leah agreed, "but I'm thanking you anyway." She stood up to leave. "Are you going?" James asked, unable to keep the anxiety from his voice. Leah paused. "I don't know yet." "I meant what I wrote," James said. "I hope you'll stay, but I understand if you can't." Leah studied his face for a long moment. "You look tired." "It's been a long morning." "Get some rest," she said. "Whatever happens with the bank, you'll need your strength." After she left, James felt a glimmer of hope. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no either. And she seemed concerned about him. It wasn't much, but it was something. That evening, Wilson informed James that Leah had gone into town with 2 other women. His heart sank, thinking she had decided to leave after all. But at dinner time she returned carrying a small package. James found her in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal. "You went to town?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Leah nodded. "I needed to see it for myself, as a free woman." "And how was it?" "Different," she said. "People looked at me strangely when I went into the general store, but the shopkeeper took my money just like anyone else's." James leaned against the doorframe. "What did you buy?" Leah reached for the package and unwrapped it, revealing a small leather-bound book. "It's blank," she explained, "for writing." "You know how to write?" James asked, surprised. "Your father's first wife taught my mother," Leah said, "and my mother taught me in secret. It was dangerous knowledge for someone like me." James felt a rush of shame at his assumption. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "It's all right," Leah interrupted. "You're learning, we all are." That night, for the first time, Leah joined James for dinner in the dining room, instead of eating in the kitchen after serving him. The conversation was awkward at first, but gradually they began to talk more freely. "Tell me about Boston," Leah said as they ate. "What was it like?" James described the bustling city, the university, the different kinds of people who lived and worked together. "There are free black communities there," he told her. "Churches, schools, businesses." "That sounds like a fairy tale," Leah said. "It's real," James assured her. "Different from here, but not perfect. There's still prejudice, still injustice." "Booty, there are choices," Leah said. "Possibilities." "Yes," James agreed. "Many more than here." After dinner, James showed Leah his father's study, now his. The walls were lined with books, and Leah ran her fingers along the spines, reading the titles. "You can borrow any of them," James offered. "I might take you up on that," Leah said. Her eyes fell on a portrait of James's father hanging over the fireplace. "He's still watching." James followed her gaze. "Sometimes I feel like I can't escape him, even now." "I know the feeling," Leah said quietly. As the days passed, more women left the plantation, seeking opportunities elsewhere. Those who remained settled into their new roles. Leah continued to work in the house, but now as a paid housekeeper rather than a slave. She and James developed a careful friendship, sharing meals and conversations. But the threat from the bank loomed over everything. James spent hours poring over the plantation's accounts, looking for a way to raise the money needed to pay the loans. One evening, Leah found him asleep at his desk, surrounded by ledgers and papers. She gently touched his shoulder. "James," she said softly, "you should go to bed." He stirred, blinking up at her. It was the first time she had called him by his first name instead of Mr. Ashcroft. "I can't figure it out," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Even if I sell pea out of the land, it won't be enough." "What about the cotton?" Leah asked, looking at the ledgers. "We harvested less this year with fewer workers," James explained, "and prices are down." Leah sat in the chair across from him. "My mother used to say that hard times show us who our real friends are." James gave a bitter laugh. "I don't have many friends left, it seems." "You have more than you think," Leah said. "The people who stayed, they believe in what you're doing here." "And you?" James asked, meeting her eyes. "Do you believe in me too?" Leah held his gaze. "I believe you're trying to do right. That's more than I can say for most men I've known." It wasn't a declaration of love, but James felt something shift between them. A wall coming down just slightly. The next morning, James was surprised to find several of the remaining workers gathered outside the main house. Leah stood with them. "What's going on?" he asked. A woman named Martha stepped forward. "Leah told us about the bank, about the loans." James shot Leah a questioning look, but she just nodded encouragingly. "We want to help," Martha continued. "Some of us have saved our wages. It's not much, but—" "No," James interrupted, shocked. "I can't take your money." "You've earned it." "It's our choice," another woman said firmly. "This place is our home too." James felt a lump in his throat. "I appreciate the offer, truly, but this is my problem to solve." After the women dispersed, James turned to Leah. "Why did you tell them?" "Because they deserve to know," she replied. "This affects all of us, not just you." "I never expected them to offer their savings," James said, still stunned. "That's because you still don't understand," Leah said. "For the first time, they have something that's truly theirs to give, and they chose to offer it to you." Jai. Mez was humbled by the gesture, even though he couldn't accept it. He had to find another way. 2 weeks before the bank's deadline, James received a visitor from New York, Mr. Harrison, a businessman he'd met during his time in Boston. "I heard about your situation," Harrison said as they walked the grounds, "and about what you've done here." "News travels fast," James remarked. "There are those in the North who support your efforts," Harrison said. "Investors who believe slavery is not just morally wrong, but bad for business in the long run." James stopped walking. "What are you suggesting?" "A partnership," Harrison explained. "My associates would provide the capital to pay off your loans. In return, Ashcroft Plantation would become a model farm. Fair wages, decent housing, education for children. We'd share in the profits, of course. And if there are no profits, James asked. Harrison smiled. There will be. Maybe not immediately, but we're thinking long-term. James considered the offer. It seemed too good to be true. Why would these investors take such a risk? Some for moral reasons, Harrison admitted. Others see the writing on the wall. Change is coming, James, whether the South is ready or not. Those who adapt first will have the advantage. I'd need to think about it, James said cautiously. Of course, Harrison handed him a document. The TRMs are all here, but don't think too long. Your 30 days are almost up. That night, James shared the proposal with Leah. They sat on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. What do you think? He asked after explaining Harrison's offer. Leah considered carefully. It sounds promising, but can you trust him? I believe so, James said. I knew him in Boston. He has a reputation for fair dealing. And you wouldn't lose the plantation? No, James assured her. I'd still be in charge, just with partners now. Leah nodded slowly. Then I think you should accept. Really? James was surprised by her decisiveness. This place deserves a future, Leah said, looking out over the fields. A better one than its past. James studied her profile in the fading light. And what about your future, Leah? Have you decided yet? She turned to face him. I'm still here, aren't I? Yes, he said softly. You are. Their eyes held for a long moment. Then Leah stood up. Good night, James, she said, touching his shoulder briefly before walking away. James sat alone on the veranda long after she'd gone, hope blooming in his chest for the first time in weeks. The next day, James sent a letter to Harrison accepting the partnership. It would take time to finalize the details, but Harrison assured him he would handle the bank immediately. True to his word, 3 days later, Harrison arrived with documents showing the loans had been paid in full. Judge Thornton and Mr. Beaumont were furious, but there was nothing they could do. That evening, James held a small celebration for everyone on the plantation. Tables were set up in the yard, loaded with food and drink. There was music and dancing, a rare moment of joy in a place that had known too much sorrow. James noticed Leah standing apart from the festivities, watching with a small smile. He approached her, offering a glass of lemonade. You're not celebrating? He asked. I am, she said, accepting the drink. Just quietly. They stood side by side, watching the others dance. Thank you, James said suddenly, for believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. Leah turned to look at him. You made your own choices, James. Good ones. Not always, he admitted. I was wrong to keep your freedom from you. I see that now. Yes, you were, Leah agreed. But you learned. That's more than most people do. A warm breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of magnolias. In the distance, lanterns glowed like fireflies against the darkening sky. Dance with me? James asked, extending his hand. Leah hesitated, then placed her hand in his. One dance, she said with a small smile. As they moved together to the music, James felt a contentment that he'd never known before. The plantation was safe. The people who remained were free and fairly paid. And Leah was in his arms, not because she had to be, but because she chose to be. For the first time since returning to Ashcroft, James felt like he was exactly where he belonged. But as the music ended and Leah stepped back, her expression turned serious. James, she said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. Before she could continue, Wilso N. hurried up to them, his face grave. Mr. Ashcroft, he said urgently, there's a fire in the cotton storage barn. In the distance, flames leapt into the night sky, casting an orange glow over the plantation. People began running toward the blaze, shouting for water. James and Leah exchanged a look of alarm. Whatever Leah had been about to say would have to wait. As they raced toward the fire, neither noticed Judge Thornton watching from the shadows, ASE. Satisfied smile on his face. The cotton storage barn blazed against the night sky, sending sparks and thick black smoke into the air. Men and women formed a bucket line from the well to the fire, passing water down the line in a desperate attempt to control the flames. James took charge immediately. Wilson, get everyone away from the north side. The roof's about to collapse. Leah grabbed buckets and joined the line, her face streaked with soot. The heat was intense, making it difficult to get close enough to do any good. The fire roared like a living thing, consuming years of stored cotton. "It's no use," someone shouted. "We can't save it." "Focus on keeping it from spreading to the other buildings," James ordered. For 2 hours, they fought the fire. By the time they managed to contain it, the storage barn was nothing but smoldering ruins. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt, though several people had minor burns and smoke inhalation. As dawn broke, James surveyed the damage. The barn and all the cotton stored inside, worth thousands of dollars, were gone. It was a devastating blow to the plantation's finances, especially after just resolving the loan crisis. "It wasn't an accident," a deep voice said behind him. James turned to see Sam, one of the older workers who had stayed on after being freed. "What do you mean?" James asked. Sam pointed to a spot near what used to be the barn door. "Fire started there, and I found this." He held up a broken liquor bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck, a crude firebomb. James took the bottle, anger rising in his chest. "Did you see anyone?" Sam shook his head. "But I got a feeling who might have done it." "Judge Thornton," James said grimly. "Man like that don't take kindly to being crossed," Sam agreed. Back at the main house, James found Leah tending to a young woman with burned hands. She looked up as he entered, her face drawn with exhaustion. "How bad is it?" she asked. "The barn's gone, all the cotton with it." James ran a hand through his ash-covered hair. "Sam thinks it was deliberate. Thornton's work, most likely." Leah finished bandaging the woman's hands and sent her to rest. When they were alone, she said, "Can you prove it?" "No," James admitted. "But who else would want to hurt us this badly? He's been against everything we're doing here from the start." "What will you do?" James paced the room. "I don't know yet, but I won't let him win." Leah touched his arm gently. "You need to rest. You've been up all night." "So have you," James pointed out. "I'm used to long nights," Leah said with a tired smile. "Go on. I'll wake you if anything happens." James was too exhausted to argue. He went upstairs to his room and fell into a troubled sleep filled with dreams of fire and shadowy figures. When he woke several hours later, he found a tray with food and coffee by his bed. A small note in Leah's handwriting said simply, "Eat, then we'll talk." Downstairs, the house was quiet. James found Leah in the study examining the plantation's account books. "You've been busy," he observed, noticing the papers spread across the desk. "I needed to understand how bad things are," Leah said. "After the fire." James sat across from her. "And?" "It's not good," she admitted. "But it's not hopeless either. The partnership with Harrison helps, but you'll need to plant more than just cotton next season." James was impressed. "You understand the books?" Leah gave him a level look. "I've been managing this household for years. Your father never noticed, but I can read numbers as well as words." "I'm sorry," James said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "It's all right," Leah interrupted. "Most people underestimate me. It's been useful in its way." They spent the next hour going over the accounts together. Leah had practical suggestions for cutting costs and maximizing the remaining resources. James realized, not for the first time, how remarkable she was. "You wanted to tell me something," James said suddenly, remembering the moment before the fire. "Last night at the celebration." Leah's expression changed, becoming guarded. "It can wait." "Are you sure?" She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "We have more important things to worry about right now." Before James could press further, Wilson entered with news that Mr. Harrison had arrived from town. Harrison was shocked by the fire damage. "This is a serious setback," he said as they toured the burned remains. "My partners won't be pleased." "The partnership agreement is already signed," James reminded him. "They can't back out now." "No," Harrison agreed. "But they may want to renegotiate terms." James felt his stomach tighten. "I can rebuild, plant different crops, we'll recover." Harrison looked skeptical. "I believe in what you're doing here, James. But business is business. My partners invested expecting a certain return." "And they'll get it," James insisted. "I just need time." "I'll do what I can," Harrison promised before leaving, "but prepare yourself for a difficult conversation when the Teeners meet next week." After Harrison left, James slammed his fist against a porch column in frustration. Everything he'd worked for was in jeopardy again. "We'll find a way," Leah said, coming to stand beside him. James looked at her. "We?" "Yes, we," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere, James." The simple declaration meant more to him than she could know. "Thank you," he said softly. That evening, as they sat on the veranda watching the sunset, James made a decision. "I'm going to confront Thornton," he announced. "Tomorrow." Leah sat up straight. "That's dangerous. He's powerful in this town." "I can't just let him get away with this," James said. "First the loans, now the fire. He's trying to destroy everything we've built." "And what if he succeeds?" Leah asked. "What if he has you arrested, or worse?" James hadn't considered that possibility. "You think he'd go that far?" "Men like Thornton believe they're above the law," Leah said. "Be careful, James, please." Her concern touched him deeply. He reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. "I'll be careful," he promised. The next morning, James rode into town. Judge Thornton's mansion stood on the highest hill, overlooking the rest of the community like a castle surveying its kingdom. The butler showed James to Thornton's study, where the judge sat behind an imposing desk. "Ashcroft," Thornton said without rising. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "I think you know why I'm here," James said coldly. Thornton raised an eyebrow. "I'm afraid I don't." "The fire at my plantation," James said. "You're responsible." Thornton laughed. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" "We both know I don't," James admitted. "But I'm warning you, stay away from Ashcroft. If anything else happens, I'll make sure everyone knows who's behind it." "Threats, Ashcroft?" Thornton stood slowly. "That's not wise, especially from someone in your precarious position." "What's that supposed to mean?" Thornton walked to the window. "I hear your northern investors are having second thoughts after the fire. Shame, really. All that work to save your father's legacy, only to lose it anyway." The confirmation that Thornton knew about the partnership's troubles was telling. "How did you know?" "See about my investors' concerns," Thornton smiled. "This is a small town, James. I have ears everywhere." James stepped closer. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you'll gain, by destroying me, it won't work. I'm not leaving, and I'm not going back to the old ways." "We'll see," Thornton said, unmoved. "Change is hard, Ashcroft. People resist it, sometimes violently." "Is that another threat?" Thornton shrugged. "Merely an observation. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important matters to attend to." James left, fuming but also worried. Thornton hadn't denied anything, but he hadn't admitted to the fire either, and his confidence suggested he had more planned. On the ride back to Ashcroft, James passed the town's newspaper office and noticed a crowd gathered around the latest edition posted in the window. He dismounted to see what was causing such interest. The headline made his blood run cold. "Scandal at Ashcroft Plantation, Young Master Court's Former Slave." The article, full of innuendo and outright lies, described James's relationship with Leah in the most salacious terms, posy. Cybele? It questioned his mental stability, suggested improper relationships had been going on for years, and even hinted that his father's death might not have been from natural causes. James ripped the paper from the window, ignoring the stares of the townspeople. Inside, he confronted the editor, a thin man named Jenkins who had always been in Thornton's pocket. "How dare you print these lies?" James shouted, throwing the paper on the man's desk. Jenkins adjusted his spectacles nervously. "We report the news, Mr. Ashcroft." "This isn't news, it's slander." "Our sources are reliable," Jenkins insisted, "and the public has a right to know what's happening at Ashcroft Plantation." "Your source is Thornton," James said flatly. Jenkins didn't deny it. "Judge Thornton is a respected member of this community." "Print a retraction," James demanded, "or I'll sue this paper out of existence." "On what grounds?" Jenkins smirked. "Everything we printed is either true or matters of public speculation. You are keeping a former slave woman in your house, aren't you?" James wanted to punch the smug look off Jenkins' face, but he restrained himself. Violence would only make things worse. "You haven't heard the last of this," he warned before storming out. By the time James returned to Ashcroft, the news had already spread. Wilson met him at the door with a grave expression. "I take it you've seen the paper," James said wearily. Wilson nodded. "Miss Leah has too." James's heart sank. "Where is she?" "In the garden," Wilson said. "She's been there all afternoon." James found Leah sitting on a stone bench among the roses. Her back was straight, her face composed, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said, sitting beside her. "I should have expected something like this from Thornton." "It's not your fault," Leah said quietly, "and it's nothing I haven't heard before in whispers and behind closed doors. But to have it printed for everyone to see—" "Words can't hurt me anymore, James," Leah interrupted. "I've survived worse." James marveled at her strength. "I went to see Thornton. He all but admitted to the fire, but I couldn't get him to say it outright." "Of course not," Leah said. "Men like him are too clever for that." They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the sweet scent of roses. "There's something you should know," Leah finally said. "What I wanted to tell you before the fire." James turned to face her. "I'm listening." Leah took a deep breath. "I'm leaving Ashcroft." The words hit James like a physical blow. "What? Why?" "I need to find out who I am away from this place," Leah explained. "I've spent my whole life here, first as a slave, now as whatever I am now." "You're free," James said, at his voice rough with emotion. "Free to stay or go as you choose." "That's just it," Leah said, meeting his gaze. "I need to make that choice knowing what else is out there. The world you told me about. Boston, Philadelphia, New York. I need to see it for myself." James felt like his heart was breaking, but he understood. "When will you go?" "I was planning to leave next week," Leah said. "But now, with the fire and these newspaper stories, maybe it's better if I go sooner." "Because of what people are saying?" James asked. "We can fight that together." Leah shook her head. "Not just that. As long as I'm here, Thornton and men like him will use me against you. They'll never accept what you're trying to build if they think it's all because of feelings for me." "I don't care what they think," James insisted. "But you should," Leah said gently. "What you're doing here is important. It's bigger than just us, and I won't be the reason it fails." James wanted to argue, to beg her to stay, but he knew she was right. His feelings for her had clouded his judgment from the beginning. "Will you come back?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leah's eyes softened. "I don't know, but I hope so." The news of Leah's decision spread quickly through the plantation. Many of the women who had stayed came to wish her well. Some offered places to stay in northern cities where they had relatives or friends who had escaped slavery years before. Martha, who had become something of a leader among the remaining workers, came to see James the day before Leah's departure. "You're letting her go just like that?" she asked bluntly. James looked up from the paperwork on his desk. "It's her choice, Martha. I won't hold her back." "And what about your feelings?" Martha persisted. "Everyone can see how you look at each other." "My feelings don't matter," James said. "She needs to find her own path." Martha shook her head. "You white folks make things so complicated. If you love someone, you tell them. Fight for them." "It's not that simple." "It is that simple," Martha insisted. "But you better figure it out quick. She leaves tomorrow." That night, James couldn't sleep. He paced his room, Martha's words echoing in his head. Was she right? Should he ask Leah to stay? Or would that be selfish after everything she'd been through? Dawn was breaking when he finally made a decision. He sat at his desk and wrote a letter, pouring his heart onto the page. When he finished, he sealed it carefully and wrote Leah's name on the envelope. Leah was scheduled to leave on the morning stage to Richmond, where she would then take a train north. James had arranged everything, given her enough money to start a new life and even written letters of reduction to friends in Boston who could help her find work. As the household gathered to say goodbye, James stood apart, the letter heavy in his pocket. Leah moved through the crowd, hugging the women she had lived and worked with all her life. There were tears and promises to write. Finally, she came to James. They stood facing each other, so much left unsaid between them. "Thank you," Leah said simply, "for everything." James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Then, before he could change his mind, he took the letter from his pocket and handed it to her. "Don't read it until you're gone," he said. "Please." Leah took the letter, her fingers brushing his. "Goodbye, James." "Goodbye, Leah." He watched as she climbed into the waiting carriage, her single bag of belongings beside her. As the carriage pulled away, she looked back once, her eyes finding his across the distance, and then she was gone. The Plantation felt empty without her, though life continued. James threw himself into rebuilding after the fire. The partnership with Harrison survived, though with adjusted terms that gave the northern investors a larger share of future profits. Judge Thornton continued his campaign against Ashcroft, but with less success as time passed. Other plantations in the area, seeing that James's experiment wasn't failing as predicted, began to cautiously adopt some of his methods, paying wages, improving living conditions. 2 months after Leah's departure, James received his first letter from her. She was in Boston, working as a teacher's assistant in a school for freed slaves. She described the city, the people she'd met, the new experiences she was having. She didn't mention his letter, and James tried not to be disappointed. He wrote back, telling her about the changes at Ashcroft, the rebuilding efforts, the small victories against Thornton and his allies. They continued corresponding every few weeks. James kept all her letters in a box in his desk drawer, reading them over and over until he knew them by heart. 6 months passed. Spring turned to summer, and summer to fall. The rebuilt barn was filled with a successful harvest of not just cotton, but corn, wheat, and other crops. The partnership was finally showing profits, proving that a plantation could succeed without slavery. One crisp October evening, James sat on the veranda watching the sunset, a familiar ache in his chest. He'd grown used to missing Leah, but it never really got easier. Wilson appeared at the door. "There's a carriage coming up the drive, sir." James stood, peering into the gathering dusk. It was too late for normal visitors. "Are we expecting anyone?" "No, sir," Wilson said, "but it looks like Thompson's livery from town." James descended the porch steps, curious. The carriage came to a stop and the driver jumped down to open the door. A woman stepped out, her face hidden by the fading light. But James would know that silhouette anywhere. "Leah," he whispered, hardly daring to believe it. She walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. She looked different somehow, more confident perhaps. Her clothes were new and fashionable, but it was more than that. She carried herself like someone who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. "Hello, James," she said, her voice just as he remembered. "You're back," he said, still stunned. "I didn't know. You didn't write that you were coming." "I wanted to surprise you," Leah said with a small smile. "Did it work?" James laughed, his heart suddenly lighter than it had been in months. "Yes, definitely yes." They stood looking at each other, the months of separation falling away. "Your letter," Leah said finally. "I read it. Many times." James swallowed hard. In that letter, he had laid bare his heart, his love for her, his hopes for their future, his promise to wait for her, however long it took. "I meant every word," he said softly. Leah stepped closer. "I know. That's why I came back." "To stay?" James hardly dared to ask. "To stay," Leah confirmed, "if you still want me to." Instead of answering, James closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her, their first kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Leah's eyes were shining. "I'll take that as a yes," she said, smiling. James smiled back, happier than he'd ever been. "Welcome home, Leah." But their reunion was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. James turned to see several men riding hard toward the house, torches in hand. At their head was Judge Thornton. "Get inside," James told Leah urgently. "Now." "What's happening?" she asked, alarmed. "Thornton," James said grimly. And he's not alone. As the riders drew closer, James stood his ground on the steps of the house he'd fought so hard to save. Whatever Thornton had planned, James would face it, for Ashcroft, for the people who depended on him, and for Leah, who had chosen to come back to him after finding her freedom in the wider world. The riders approached the house, torches blazing against the darkening sky. Judge Thornton sat tall on his black stallion, his face twisted with rage. Behind him rode 6 men, including the banker Beaumont and several other plantation owners from the area. "Ashcroft," Thornton shouted, "come down here and face us." James stood firmly on the porch steps. "Get inside," he said again to Leah. "Wilson, make sure all the doors are locked." Leah shook her head. "I'm not leaving you alone out here." "Please," James urged, "these men are dangerous." "So am I," Leah replied, her eyes flashing. "I didn't come all the way back from Boston to hide in the house while you faced them alone." James saw the determination in her face and knew it was useless to argue. Together, they stood side by side as Thornton and his men dismounted. "What do you want, Thornton?" James called out. "Justice," the judge spat. "We've tolerated your northern ideas long enough. You're corrupting the entire county with your radical notions." "Free labor isn't radical," James replied. "It's the future." "Not in Mississippi," Beaumont cut in. "Not while we have anything to say about it." Thornton pointed at Leah. "And now you've brought her back to flaunt your unnatural relationship in front of the whole town." James felt Leah tense beside him. "My relationship with Miss Leah is none of your business," he said coldly. "It is when it threatens our way of life," one of the other men shouted. "You're giving ideas to our slaves." "Ideas of freedom?" James challenged. "Of basic human dignity? Good. They deserve to have those ideas." Thornton stepped forward, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "We came here tonight to give you one last chance, Ashcroft. Restore the natural order on your plantation, or face the consequences." "And your hat consequences, would those be?" James asked, even though he already knew the answer. Thornton glanced meaningfully at the torches his men carried. "This time, we won't stop with the cotton barn." A cold fear gripped James's heart. They meant to burn down the entire plantation, the house, the fields, everything. "You're threatening arson in front of witnesses," James said. "Not very smart for a judge." Thornton laughed. "What witnesses? Your former slaves? Who would believe them against us?" "I would," a new voice called out. Everyone turned to see Sheriff Davis riding up the lane, followed by several deputies. The sheriff was a gruff older man who had served the county for decades. He had always been fair, even if he wasn't particularly sympathetic to James's reforms. "What's going on here, Judge?" Davis asked, dismounting slowly. "Looks like a lynch mob to me." "This isn't your concern, Sheriff," Thornton said dismissively. "Just a private disagreement between gentlemen." "With torches," Davis raised an eyebrow, "and 6 against 1 doesn't seem very gentlemanly to me." James stepped forward. "They came to threaten me, Sheriff, to burn down Ashcroft if I don't return to slave labor." "That's a lie," Thornton shouted. "We came to talk sense into him." "Armed with torches and pistols?" Davis shook his head. "I don't think so, Judge." Beaumont pushed forward. "Sheriff, you know what Ashcroft has been doing here. Paying slaves, letting them live like equals. It's against the natural order." "Maybe so," Davis acknowledged. "But burning down a man's property is against the law, and that's what I'm paid to uphold." He turned to Thornton's men. "Put those torches out, now." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, reluctantly, the men extinguished their torches against the ground. "This isn't over, Ashcroft," Thornton warned. "Not by a long shot." "Actually, Judge," Davis said, "I think it is, at least for tonight. You and your friends are going to ride back to town with me and my deputies." "You're arresting us?" Thornton was incredulous. "Let's call it an escort," Davis said mildly, "to make sure you get home safely, and to make sure Ashcroft Plantation stays standing." As Thornton and his men mounted their horses, the judge fixed James with a venomous glare. "You haven't seen the last of me." "I expect not," James replied evenly. "But next time, leave the torches at home." They watched as Sheriff Davis led the men away, his deputies positioned strategically around them. When they were out of sight, Leah let out a shaky breath. That was close. James turned to her, his eyes full of concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him. "Though this wasn't exactly the homecoming I imagined," James managed a smiley. "Welcome back to Mississippi." Inside the house, Wilson had gathered everyone in the main parlor. Worried faces looked up as James and Leah entered. "Is it true?" Martha asked. "They came to burn us out?" James nodded grimly. "But the sheriff stopped them. We're safe for now." "For now," Sam repeated. "But what about tomorrow? Or the next day?" It was a question James had been asking himself. Thornton wouldn't give up easily, especially now that he'd be publicly humiliated by the sheriff. "We'll have to be vigilant," James said. "Postguards at night, make sure we're prepared." "That's no way to live," one of the younger women protested. "Always looking over our shoulders, waiting for them to attack." "We could leave," another suggested. "Find somewhere safer." "No," James said firmly. "This is our home. I won't let Thornton drive us away." Leah stepped forward. "In Boston, I learned about a network of people who help protect free black communities. They share information, provide legal assistance, even armed guards when necessary." "Abolitionists?" James asked. "Some of them," Leah nodded. "But also lawyers, businessmen, politicians, people with influence, people who believe in what we're doing here." "Like Harrison and his partners," James realized. "Exactly," Leah said. "I've made contacts in Boston. I can write to them, ask for help." "I have contacts too," James added. "Former classmates who've gone into politics. Maybe it's time to call in some favors." For the first time that evening, hope began to replace fear in the room. They weren't alone in this fight. Later that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, James and Leah sat in the study. The fire crackled in the grate, casting warm light over the room. "I still can't believe you're really here," James said, looking at her across his father's old desk. "When you left, I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again." "I wasn't sure either," Leah admitted. "I needed to know who I was away from this place, away from you." "And did you find out?" Leah smiled. "I did. I found that I'm stronger than I knew, that I can make my own way in Tee world." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit plantation. "In Boston, I could have had a good life. People there treated me with respect. I was teaching, learning, growing." "Then why did you come back?" James asked quietly. Leah turned to face him. "Because of your letter. Because even with all that freedom, all those new experiences, something was missing." "What?" "You," she said simply. "The way you look at me. The way you believe in me. The way you fought for this place, for these people." James rose and moved toward her. "I never stopped thinking about you. Not for a single day." "I know," Leah said softly. "That's why I came back. Because what we have, what we could build together, is worth fighting for." James took her hands in his. "Thornton and men like him won't make it easy." "Nothing worth having ever comes easy," Leah replied. "But we're not alone in this fight anymore." James brushed a strand of hair from her face. "No, we're not." Their lips met in a tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The next morning, James woke to the sound of voices outside. He hurried to the window and was surprised to see Sheriff Davis riding up the lane, accompanied by a well-dressed stranger. After dressing quickly, James went downstairs to find Leah already greeting the visitors in the parlor. "James," she said as he entered, "this is Mr. Collins from the governor's office in Jackson." The man rose and extended his hand. "Mr. Ashcroft, I've heard a great deal about what you're doing here." James shook his hand cautiously. "All bad, I imagine." Collins smiled. "On the contrary, Governor Jenkins is quite interested in your experiment." "The governor?" James was stunned. Why would he care about Ashcroft? "Because the winds of change are blowing, Mr. Ashcroft," Collins explained. "Slowly, perhaps, but inevitably, and smart men prepare for change rather than resist it." He sat back down, accepting a cup of coffee from Wilson. "The governor believes that Mississippi's future depends on finding a middle path, one that preserves our agricultural economy while gradually adjusting to new realities." "And he thinks Ashcroft might be that middle path?" James asked. "Precisely," Collins nodded. "A working plantation that pays fair wages, provides decent conditions and still makes a profit. That's a model worth studying. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. I took the liberty of sending a report to Jackson about last night's incident. The governor doesn't take kindly to vigilante justice, even when it's led by a county judge. Judge Thornton will be suspended pending an investigation, Collins added, and Mr. Beaumont's bank will be audited for irregularities. James Coe would hardly believe what he was hearing. So the governor is on our side? Let's say he's interested in stability and progress, Collins replied diplomatically. And right now you represent progress, while Judge Thornton represents the kind of instability that could lead to violence. After Collins and the sheriff left, promising protection and support from Jackson, James turned to Leah in amazement. Did that really just happen? Leah laughed. It did. So me times, James. The world surprises you. Over the next few weeks, life at Ashcroft Plantation changed dramatically. With Judge Thornton suspended and his allies under scrutiny, the threats stopped. People from neighboring counties began to visit, curious about the plantation where former slaves worked for wages. Harrison's partners, encouraged by the governor's interest, invested more money in modernizing Ashcroft's operations. New equipment arrived, making the work easier and more productive. James started a small school for the children of his workers, with Leah as the teacher. In town, attitudes slowly shifted. Some still refused to accept the changes at Ashcroft, but others began to see the benefits. Paid workers spent money in local shops. The plantation's diverse crops found markets that pure cotton growers couldn't access. Even Jenkins, the newspaper editor, published a grudging article about Ashcroft FT's unusual but apparently viable business model. One sunny morning in early spring, James and Leah walked through the fields where the first green shoots of the new planting were emerging from the soil. Workers nodded and called greetings as they passed. I received a letter from Boston yesterday, Leah said. The school where I worked is sending 2 teachers to help set up our education program. That's wonderful, James replied. Did you write to the M about the library we want to build? Leah nodded. They're collecting books to send, and they've put me in touch with a publisher who prints simplified reading materials for beginners. James marveled at how easily she had stepped into her role as Ashcroft's education director. The shy, silent girl he had grown up with had blossomed into a confident, articulate woman who commanded respect from everyone who met her. "For you're remarkable," he said, stopping to face her. "Do you know that?" Leah smiled. "You're not so bad yourself for a plantation owner." James laughed. "Former plantation owner, soon-to-be farm cooperative manager if Harrison's newest proposal goes through." They continued walking until they reached the small cemetery where Leah's mother was buried. James had ordered a proper headstone to replace the simple wooden marker with her full name and dates carved in marble. Leah knelt to place wildflowers on the grave. She would hardly recognize this place now. Would she approve, do you think, James asked. Of Ashcroft? Leah considered. Yes, I think she would, but she'd be more interested in what's happening between us. James helped her to her feet. And what would she think about that? She'd be cautious, Leah admitted. She'd worry about the difficulties we'll face, but she'd also want me to be happy. And are you? James asked. Happy Leah looked around at the plantation, at the new schoolhouse being built near the main house, at the workers moving freely about their tasks, at the children playing without fear. Yes, she said, turning back to James. I'm happy. Are you? Instead of answering, James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I was going to wait for the right moment, but maybe this is it. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. It was my mother's, he explained. The only thing of hers I have left. Leah stared at the ring, then at James's face. I know it won't be easy, he said. There will always be people who disapprove, who try to stand in our way. But I love you, Leah. I want to build a life with you, not as master and servant, not even as employer and employee, but as husband and wife, as equals. Tears filled Leah's eyes. You know what people will say. Let them talk, J. Ames said. What matters is what we say to each other, what we promise to each other. Leah took a deep breath. When I was in Boston, I met a woman who had been a slave in Virginia. She fell in love with a white man, her owner's son. They ran away together to Massachusetts, got married, had children. Were they happy? James asked. Not always, Leah said honestly. They faced hatred, discrimination. Their children had it hardest of all, belonging to Neat, her world, fully. She looked down at the ring, still nestled in its box. But she told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "Girl, love is a rare and precious thing in this broken world. If you find it, grab hold with both hands and don't let go." Leah looked up at James, her decision made. "Yes," she said. "I will marry you, James Ashcroft." James slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. "I promise to love you and honor you all the days of my life," he said softly. "And I promise the same," Leah replied. As they sealed their engagement with a kiss, the spring breeze carried the scent of new growth across the plantation. Ashcroft was changing, just as the South would eventually change. It wouldn't be easy or without pain, but standing there in the warmth of the sun, James and Leah believed in the future they would build together. They were married a month later in the small CE, Haple on the plantation grounds. Harrison came from New York to stand as James's best man. Martha served as Leah's maid of honor. Workers and their families filled the pews, along with a few progressive friends from neighboring towns, and even some of James's former classmates who traveled from the north for the occasion. Not everyone approved, of course. Many refused the invitation. There were whispers and disapproving looks. But for every person who turned Dee away, there was another who offered congratulations and support. After the simple ceremony, everyone gathered in the gardens for a celebration. Tables laden with food stretched across the lawn. Musicians played while children danced. It was a day of joy, unlike any Ashcroft had ever seen. As evening fell, lanterns were lit throughout the garden, casting a warm glow over the festivities. James and Leah moved among their guests, accepting good wishes and airing their happiness. "Are you ready for our new adventure?" James asked his bride, as they stood together watching the celebration. Leah looked up at him, her eyes shining with love and determination. "More than ready, we have so much work to do." "Work that will take a lifetime," James agreed. "Good thing we have a lifetime to do it," Leah replied, squeezing his hand. In the years that followed, Ashcroft became known throughout the region as a place of innovation and progress. The school expanded into a proper academy that attracted students from surrounding counties. The farm cooperative model proved so successful that other plantations began to adopt similar systems. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks and challenges. The Civil War, when it finally came, brought new hardships and dangers. But through it all, James and Leah stood together, their love a beacon of hope in troubled times. And when their first child was born, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's smile, they named her Hope, for the future they were building one day at a time. The story of James and Leah Ashcroft would be told for generations. The plantation owner who freed his slaves and the one woman he kept, not through force or ownership, but through love and choice. Their legacy lived on in their children, in the school that bore their name, and in the community they created where freedom and dignity were birthright for all. It began with a single act of courage, a young man returning home and refusing to follow in his father's footsteps. It continued with a woman brave enough to demand her freedom before giving her heart. And it grew into something neither of them could have imagined on that day, when James first handed Leah her freedom papers with the question that changed both their lives. "Now that you're free, will you come back to me?" Her answer, freely given, had been yes, and in that yes was the promise of a new world, built on love instead of ownership, on choice instead of chains. A world where the past could be acknowledged but not allowed to determine the future. A world worth fighting for, worth living for, worth loving for. Together. The end.